Hello and welcome to the Behind the Blockchain podcast. Today I'm joined by Dennis O'Connell, CTO of Peregrine Limited, President of the ERC 3643 Association, and Senior Advisor to Polygon Labs R3 and Layer Zero. Dennis, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks for having me, Jack.
Yeah, no problem at all. So, Dennis, for people who don't know who you are, could you introduce yourself, please?
Oh, absolutely. So I am, as you mentioned, the CTO of Peregrine. I'm also the founder, along with my two wonderful partners, Simon and Paul Samacaro. Peregrine is a 3C licensed asset management platform in the heart of Abu Dhabi, in Abu Dhabi Global Markets. And we use our license and work with the regulator to actually tokenize on the Polygon blockchain. And we're very excited about that. I also am the president, as you mentioned, of the ERC 3643 Association, which is a global token standard with over 100 institutional members as of recording. And we're seeking to proliferate the standard and gain adoption. As far as my background, I am an engineer by training. I have a background in mechanical and aerospace engineering. I'm an Eagle Scout. And I worked for NASA for 2 years at NASA Langley in Virginia as a supersonic aerodynamic specialist. And then I left that career and that life to go pursue commodity derivatives trading in New York and Chicago for almost 10 years. And then I moved over to institutional finance in New York, working for several large banks. And that's where ultimately in 2017, I caught the idea that I actually could do digital assets and blockchain full time. And since then, I've been on that journey. So I've actually transitioned into what I call the digital asset industry, the blockchain Web3 space since 2017, and I'm sure we could go into it.
Yeah, that sounds cool. So why did you take an interest in technology in the first place?
It's a great question, actually. In my life, I've had the opportunity to work on two different floors. I worked in the Chicago Board of Trade floor when I was working at a clearing firm in Chicago. And I noticed how paper intensive it was. And, at the end of the trading day, there's just stacks of paper everywhere, receipts everywhere. They would get lost, and it's a mess. And you go up to the office and you just see, rolls and rolls of paper. And I said, this can't be. This seems so efficient, and it was the way they were doing it for years. And when I started in the 2000s, my career, I really saw the transition of technology, and I saw how technology started to really change the day-to-day business and the roles people had and the value people had, and that was quite shocking. And that trend continued throughout my career. I worked at a fund where there was a bunch of NYMEX traders, floor traders, who had to adopt to point and click trading with the dawn of internet trading as well. And throughout the whole story of those years, if you were on that stagnant side, the way of the past, in terms of doing something in the industry, you were bound to be disrupted. And it became very clear to me that the common theme throughout all the places I had worked was technology and the evolution of innovative technology. You want to be on the side that's doing the change, fomenting the change, and being the change versus the side that's getting changed. And I think that has played out well and will continue to through the rest of my career, frankly. And so seeing the hardship and seeing the difficulty, the personal struggles that people who were, once kings of their castle and their domain, as technology replaced everything they did and made things more efficient, they became less and less relevant. And I thought that was quite a shocking and stark experience for me to see that personal side. So I became very committed to embracing innovation, not even as a survivor mentality, but as sort of like an aspirational mentality, as that I figured would be my career trajectory. That in my time on the shoot, I would see several major changes, and boy, was I naive? I did not realize how much it would change. But that's what inspired me. Ultimately, blockchain to me more than AI was always so fascinating. because where I worked, especially in these large institutions, these exchanges and institutional banks, like people don't realize how inefficient or arcane some of these systems are, and how old they can be. And people think that it's a very modern system all the time, and generally it's not. And it's very, very inefficient because they just were building it at scale, and they didn't know how to. And it took a while to innovate and improve it, but it always just came this like series of band-aids and patchworks. And I said there has to be just a better way in the way we transmit data and communicate, and that was always the appeal of blockchain over the other stuff like data science, AI, and microservices, and everything else we see now today.
Yeah, for sure. And when you started out, did you always know that you wanted to be a CTO or a leader in the technology space? Like, what was your goal, I guess, when you started?
I think it's a great question. So coming up with my aerospace degree, the reason why I originally worked at Solomon Smith Barney in high school. At Smith Barney, I did an internship, and it quickly became apparent to me at that time in the early O's that you had to have an edge on Wall Street, right? Everyone has to have an edge, and for me, I thought the edge would be on the critical thinking and rationalization and STEM skills. And at the time, it was probably in full swing, but it was really accelerating. People in the STEM field, science, technology, engineering, math, going into Wall Street and really reaping the benefits of that kind of education. Critical thinking, mathematical skills, statistics skills, the whole lot. And so I realized that people that didn't have that background, while could be very successful, there was more opportunity for those people with that particular type of edge, especially as quantitative finance became a thing. And so I pursued engineering. I pursued aerospace engineering as well because I figured, well, it's difficult and it's fascinating. And I said to myself, I don't think I'll use these skills long term, but I think that the skills I gained to get the skills would benefit me long term. And certainly they have. I mean, I got my programming skills primarily in engineering, not in computer science, right?
Okay.
We would, have let's say a model to develop or some homework to do and it would require coding. And so, you could code the dynamics of heat transfer or you could code, certain dynamics of options pricing. And believe it or not, you learn later in life that they're almost the same equation beautifully enough. And so I figured that that bringing that technology aspect really suited me because, as I mentioned, technology was the main catalyst into Wall Street and to finance in general. And so coming into a space where there generally was a lack of understanding of technology or maybe a fearfulness of understanding by and large, compared to the tech sector where, you have some of the best technologists in the world. In finance, especially on the business side, you generally do not. You generally have like an absence of knowledge because they're focused on things that don't require that knowledge. It's not that they're dumb; it's that they have a different domain expertise. So I quickly rose to the top because my communication skills was my differentiator. I was an okay developer. I wasn't like one of these super guys who do the elite coding and hacker rank. To like the top five. I was decent, but I could communicate to the business and I could rationalize concepts and I could push through to strategy and raise money for projects internally. And through that, I quickly realized that that sort of communication and vision level was appropriate for me. And I started to understand the difference between a VP of engineering versus director of engineering versus a senior architect and eventually a CTO. And CTOs come in all shapes and sizes, but in finance, the primary requirement is you have to understand the business. You have to understand what you're doing. Whether that's on the front office side, trading and creating models for algorithmic trading or derivatives, or it's on the back office side and understanding complex structures for settlement and different protocols. All of that stuff is very necessary to the business, but it has to be communicated. I also, as an Eagle Scout, was always a natural leader. I was very gregarious, outgoing, self-organizing, and so that kind of three-part set of skills of communication, technical knowledge, and leadership always naturally gravitated to CTO role to me. Even in situations where I wouldn't seek a CTO role. I would usually organically rise just because people wanted me to run projects for them or oversee stuff or get resources or whatever. I like to think I'm like a producer. I'm more behind the scenes than on screen.
Yeah.
But that has always been and something very natural for me. And being the CTO of Peregrine was something that I was very blessed to have. At the time, I was working for a great company called Securrency. And I was approached by the leadership of Peregrine to become the CTO of it. And I said, yeah, let's get back in the saddle and do it again. And it became a very natural a role for me, and it's something that I continue to evolve and do. And it takes a lot of work to be a CTO, right? It's to me, really, CTO is almost three jobs in one. In many ways, if you're a person that enjoys individual coding and a lot of downtime by yourself, just coding, don't be a CTO. Even hands-on CTOs, don't be a CTO. But if you're a person that likes leadership and likes building organizations, and maybe gets to dabble into the technical aspect of it, and build some patents in your expert in your field, it might be a calling for you.
That sounds great. Well, yeah, I mean, there's quite a few questions that I'd like to ask you about what it's like to be a CTO. But if we could go back to, I guess, your career journey so far. Obviously, you've worked at some really prestigious organisations, as you mentioned, some really really large banks, and obviously now helping a number of really prestigious blockchain and Web3 companies. Could you talk us through in a little bit more detail about some of the roles that you've held within your career and kind of what those have looked like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, at Nestle Langley, I was an aerospace engineer, which was really cool. And I had a really, really great mentor who was actually a paraplegic. And he actually would be in a wheelchair, couldn't move his arms or legs, but he would go up to his computer and he would literally talk code into the screen. And
Oh,
he was one of the guys who helped build the space shuttle. And that was really deeply inspiring. And I struggled like hell during my years. But it was good because I really got a formative background in low level computing and that as an individual contributor. And then I moved on to become basically, I would say, almost like a software developer in the traditional sense. For a few years, I think for 5, 6 years, I was different versions of a software developer around algorithmic trading or clearing systems or synthetic commodities or order management and execution and that sort of stuff. And when you become a senior senior developer or trading systems developer that I did at my time at RJ O'Brien, I had really really great mentors, and so it was a great aspect because it was a small enough futures commodity merchant, or FCM as we call it, or futures clearing merchant, I should say, where their job was to take orders from institutions, individuals, process those orders, and send them to exchange for execution. And so I got to interact with the traders. I got to interact with back office technology people, with the data architects, and it was whole cross domain. And it was really some very formative years for me to learn, that kind of art and skill as a senior developer. From there, I did a couple of startups on the side while I was working in futures back in my time in Chicago. Believe it or not, I actually won a few awards for being even a part-time CTO, which was funny enough. And I had a really good team during that experience, especially at Elm Spring, which was at the time the number one real estate incubator. And we got to do all sorts of pitching and VC. And so at part-time CTO stuff I did while I had my day job was really good for learning about VC and pitching and incubation and startup and lean developments and very kind of contra, even though the title was similar in sort of what I did, develop software for commercial applications, the approach was vastly different. If you think about during my day job, you're dealing with, regulators, you're dealing with exchange, you're dealing with clients, there's massive amounts of planning and requirements that go in. And then at night, when you're working on, a fun little real estate project, it's you and a couple mates, and you're having a beer, coding at the Merchandise Mart, which is where the incubator was, 1871. And it was fun. And you're pure creation ideation. And I always thought that was interesting, but it was more stressful because the idea was based on, your ability. And while you had a lot of support, you also had to build a lot of skills. And so that leadership skills took me in a really good direction. I definitely then I moved on to becoming a senior global architect at Merrill for a few years for Stockholm and Delta One desks, and that was an incredible job. At the time, I was part of a team of 120 developers across the world. It was one of the leadership positions there, and really started honing my skills I had learned from my side gigs as well as my main job. And I was approached, believe it or not, about blockchain. And I said, well, you know what? I'm used to kind of scrounging for talent. Let me go, traverse the bank. And there was an innovation fair in December, and we said, hey, let's get a group of developers together. And we did for free. And believe it or not, we created a blockchain project, the first of its kind, and that was really, really fascinating. And we ended up placing 11th. There's only top 10, but the grandfather sink is out of all the projects that were in the top 10. There were no blockchain projects, and so they kind of felt bad for us or novel for us. And we got to do a Shark Tank style pitch for the board of Bank of America Merrill Lynch, which was really awesome. And then my life changed. So then I went from basically senior architect to being probably I'll be generous to say I was one of the first, but probably was one of the first 10 or 20 what you would now call smart contract developers or Web3 developers or architects at the bank. And it was very, very fly by the wire. We still have all the main work that we did. And again, that's why I mentioned, the side gigs, because it was a skill set of, okay, I have my main canon level of work, but then I also have these other projects I'm really passionate about. So I'm going to get that work done, do a good job there, so I could get to those projects. And that was very interesting. And I have to give credit to the executive managing director, Robert Wilson. Rob Wilson is a dear friend of mine now, who really kind of created the space for us for that team to get compute and to get projects and to meet with the traders and all that. I then moved on to, when Rob moved on to Bank of New York Mellon, I actually followed him on to Bank of New York Mellon, and there I was, again, a principal architect, and eventually I was promoted because at Bank of New York Mellon is where I had my biggest digital assets transformation. I had a lot of really great people around me, and that was a very, very amazing journey from being a senior technical contributor or leader to becoming almost a director or managing director executive of a bank. And it was a very big shift for a variety of reasons. When you go into such a large institution like Bank of New York Mellon, what you come to realize it's actually many siloed businesses under one roof, and then there's sort of like this horizontal business that oversees everything. And it was through, and I'm sure we'll get into it, through all the different blockchain projects that I have procured and the name I made for myself there, that I got the attention of the leadership at the highest level, the executive leadership. And I had some really, really great sponsors along the way. Vikram and Sarthak were fantastic, as well as Luigi and Yair in helping me in that transition. But I made the transition, and towards the end, you started thinking like a director, more strategically, holistically about technology, not about like minutia of code, but what do things give you? What does it mean for long term? And then once I did that transformation, then I went to security. I was also a managing director level role, and then I moved over to the CTO of Peregrine full time as the largest CTO role I had. It wasn't a side gig CTO; it was a full blown one, and it was very much mirrored all the aspects of everything I'd done before. There was the architect, there's individual contributing, there was the lean startup, and then there was also the executive side as well on it. So all the skills aggregated along the way. It's not like I had a job or a title that I didn't gain value. I needed to incrementally up the ladder. Every one of those things had an important lesson or had an important skill to develop that, frankly, I actively practiced throughout the day. You could take any hour of my day and I could point to a job I did. Now I've been working now 18 years in my past. And I said, yeah, there's a period where I just did that, right? Or I just did that. And so it all aggregates up. And I think that's what you really need to be successful, especially in high profile company like Peregrine, where you have all the expectations of an institution, and you have all the pressures of a startup. So it's a tough cookie to manage, but if you have those skills, or if you're in one of those jobs, you're like, I really like it. There's guaranteed there's always something you're going to take along with you.
Yeah, for sure. And you've obviously done all sorts of different roles by the sound of it. Worked in all sorts of different types of businesses. What have you found most fun?
Innovation is most fun. Pure creation is most fun. When you get to I always love learning a new language or a new technology, and then starting to get through the kind of like the dip of it, like, oh, there's the initial excitement, and then you get to the grind. When you kind of like turn that corner and you start being able to think in that language or think in that space, that's really exciting, because those are really new thoughts that you work hard to access, and whether that is a new business that you're passionate about, or a new technology, or trying something different. To me, that's the most fun stuff. That's the pure creation, is really what gets me going and keeps me working late. 1 o'clock nights, coding along, or developing a PowerPoint or a slide. There has to be that passion there, that zest, in there. There has to be something deeper, that you want out of it. Otherwise, don't waste your time. And don't be afraid to change too. Like, I always constantly reinvent myself. I always constantly reinvent what I can do. There's the way my life is. Some weeks I'm a quant, some weeks I'm an application developer, some weeks I'm venture, some weeks I'm commercial, some weeks I'm in legal and contracts. But well, that novelty, that change, it can be stressful, and fun. The most fun I have is with the innovation by far.
That's really cool to hear. And throughout your career, are there any particular skills that stand out to you, whether that be technical skills or softer skills, that have really helped you achieve your current roles or current roles within Web3? Any that really stand
With
out?
well, yeah, a few. So first, communication is absolutely critical. Whether we like it or not, there's some extremely gifted and intelligent people that have not developed the ability to communicate. What I mean by communication isn't simply, oh, I'm just telling you what I'm going to do. It's to be able to express what you're doing to your audience in various mediums. Quick anecdote. When I was transitioning, when I was at BNY Mellon, and I was at the time a principal, and I was transitioning into this director role, a lot of times I would have to write emails to leadership. And as a developer, I was a Java developer at the time. I would pride myself, oh, I bang out this, little piece of software within a day or so, go through all the development and everything. I felt like I've done something. But there were times where I would have to write email, and it'd be 3 points. Give me 3 points on what's going on. And, it took me 6 hours to do so. It was madness. I was like, what is going on here? This isn't skill. I'm just writing an email. This is nothing. Boy, was I wrong. Writing emails that are succinct, creating PowerPoints that deliver a message, socializing ideas, and getting buy-in, being able to express, your elevator pitch or whatever, whether we like it or not, selling and the communication ideas is the single biggest thing. Building your network is the single biggest thing. Because the reality is there's a lot of smart people out there that don't do these things or look down upon these things for very good reasons, and say, well, my work will just self convey itself, and it almost never does. And many times you have the opposite problem where you have people who are very good at communicating but actually don't know the core stuff. So they put up like this really great, let's say, show, and then you go a little deeper into it. You go, okay, they go talk to my tech guy. Okay. So being able to what I call integrate the stack, right, which is I can communicate, I can conceptualize, I can execute, and then I can review, is really, really big skill. And that all allows communication to your audience. The way I talk to developers is very different than the way I talk to project managers, the way I talk to lawyers, and the way I talk to executives. So communication is one. The second one is planning and goal setting, which again, when you're a developer or when you're an engineer, you may have a structure with Jira or Agile or whatever development framework you use, and you're kind of like, I'm not a big fan of that, or it's too constricting. Yeah, it is. Some people don't like it, but it does, kind of give you a structure, whether you like it or not. And I think having a structure in life to what you're doing, whether that's hitting a certain goal, allocating time, being disciplined, right, being consistent, all those keywords we hear, being structured, I think, is very, very important for you to, maintain your focus, keep your attention. You only can do so many things concurrently. You have to make choices and sacrifices. So I think that project planning and that coordination is so critical because especially when you're successful, everyone wants your attention. And there's many times in my life where I've said yes to everything and I paid for it. From very difficult days of trying to be four people at once. And what I found is I only could do really one thing really well, two things kind of well, and three things okay. And I think that having that sort of strategic mindset, the tactical mindset of planning, saying, okay, I'm doing this today. This is my goal. I want this done by September. Really, really carries forward. Anticipating things, anticipating failure, anticipating setbacks. One of the single biggest things I could tell people is when I project plan, I rarely ever do everything goes well. I always look at something, a certain deliverable or a certain part, and I go, if this fails, what happens? What do we do if there's a catastrophic failure? And I actually build in weeks, what I call compression weeks, right? So just if that thing runs over, we're still okay, or we have some sort of idea about that sort of stuff. And that has always paid me tremendous dividends. So I would absolutely say communication, and I absolutely would say structure are two of my biggest.
And where can someone go to learn how to communicate more effectively, or where can they go? Is there anywhere they can go to learn how to plan effectively?
Absolutely. I'm really glad you asked this. So for me, the biggest thing has always been, getting practical knowledge, not theoretical knowledge. It's one of the things that always has frustrated me, really profoundly with these with education in general is getting an education from college is not the same thing as getting experience. In many ways, it sets you up well, but it doesn't really set you up to the point where you think you feel like complete. And so what I've always thought is rather than going on YouTube and just watching videos or Coursera, I like to find things that are engaging. And I think it's important to have both. You don't want to overly learn theory and do nothing. You always want to be, in my word, in a constant action state. And so far, the best platform I've seen so far that gives you kind of that tactical, little bit of information, apply it right away has been Udemy. Believe it or not, Udemy by far there's a quality control to what they have. There's also different courses in different domains. So that's another big thing is that for me, I've always wanted to learn, hey, like being a chartered financial analyst or getting a series license or communicating or cyber defense or whatever. There's a lot of mediums where you can watch something and say, okay, I saw the guy code and that was interesting, but where do I start? And Udemy has been one of those things where I think one, there's a lot of different topics. Two, the courses are very short and sweet. And three, they tend to be heavily action based. Like the authors will give you do this, do this, do this. So there's a lot of great courses on different types of communication, which I think is also important as well. Different types of critical thinking, which is also very important. And so, I think another thing I'm trying to say is you don't always want to just learn your expertise. You kind of want to mix it up a little bit and not discount the soft skills, right? The hard skills being, I'm a developer, I want to learn Golang, I want to learn microservices, I want to learn machine learning, data science, AI. You could go on a ton of platforms and do that. You could go on Udacity, you could go on Coursera, you could go on YouTube, and they'll teach you how to do it right there. But in terms of like different skills, YouTube tends to be hit or miss. So I sometimes start on YouTube, and if I'm frustrated by what I'm seeing on YouTube, I usually go over to Udemy and say, okay, when I'm on Udemy, I know I'm going to get succinct class, doesn't cost a lot of money, and it's very, very demonstrable. And generally, they recommend other ones as well. And that I found to be very, very helpful for people.
That's really good insight. Thank you for that. I'm going to check that out myself. See if there's anything on there that, yeah, I can look into. As well, just to add in terms of communication, I think it's actually having the almost having the guts and the courage to put yourself out there. So if you're in a meeting or you get into a situation where you can then start to practice, it's just throwing yourself out there. And if it doesn't go well, it doesn't go well. But these types of things, you have to be able to be in the situation to put those things into practice and almost try and fail, really, so you can learn from that mistake and go again next time.
I think you touched on something that's really, really a core concept, and I'm glad you brought it up, which is this concept of failure. Failure to me is good. I like when I'm failing. I don't love it, right? But the reality is that you'll fail and feel like a failure most of the time. In fact, most of my successes, when I look back on them, felt like failures 95% of the time. Something wasn't going to happen. This was going to fall through. We're doing it wrong. There's never this view that, oh, I know it's successful from day one and we made it successful and everything was a peach. That just is not reality, and people don't understand that. But what they don't understand is that what feels like a failure most of the time can become a success. And it's funny how that stuff works out. Like one of the things I'll talk about was when we did the 2017 Innovation Fair at Merrill Lynch. It was a hard grind. It was an ugly project. I mean, we had no developer support. We had very limited support from our leadership. We couldn't even get servers to run the code. We had some good support from R3, which was great. But the whole time it just felt like this is all a bit wrong. It's all going to go south. And even when we placed with the Innovation Fair, when we placed 11th, we were like, oh, okay, I guess we did all right. It wasn't until that final step where we did the pitch to the leadership and we really showed everyone what we did and what we unlocked. Accidentally, did it really start to take effect, right? So they say, don't give up before the miracle happens. But you have to fail. You have to go through that, and it's not fun. It's honestly sucks. It does. It's scary doing it. It feels bad when it happens, and it takes time to recover. I mean, that's just reality. And I know there's a lot of bravado guys, and believe me, I've watched all of them, and there's sort of this romanticism about. You're successful is this grind or whatever, yeah, but there's a cost to that success, of course. And I think the best way you can be successful is to fail. Sort of that's the paradox. Why are people successful? Because they're afraid to fail. And so it's okay to fail because, well, the failure is ultimately a short-term thing. And many times in life, especially after school, you dictate the failure conditions. And the way I define failure is nothing more than giving up. If I just flat out walk away and yeah, I give up, I failed. But if I'm, to some degree still working on it or still having, I wouldn't say hope, but still dedicating time and energy for it, I'm still in the fight. And the lessons you get from failing will never ever replace what you read in a book or what you hear in a course. When you're in a course, you're in a safe place. The instructor is going to tell you all the knowledge and you're going to feel smart, like, see, I'm smarter than the next guy. I did make that mistake. You're going to make whole new mistakes. In fact, you're going to make mistakes that you're making and you still make them anyway. You're going to go to yourself, well, wait a second, I'm smarter than this, No, because just because you have awareness, you have knowledge of it, does not mean you have experience of it. And performing something always looks easy. You go to a baseball game, a football game, sports game, whatever. They make it look easy because what they do makes sense. But you don't see the literally hundreds of thousands of times they failed, and that's true in every industry, right? How many times did I have a catastrophic bug in my program? How many times did I not have a PowerPoint ready? How many times did I stutter? How many times did I misspell things in my emails? All the time they happen. Do people remember that? No, they don't. You know what they remember? They remember how you made them feel, what your intention was, and that you either apologized and you pushed through, right? And I think that's really, really critical for people who are like, well, how does one, get up, in these ranks? The reality is you have to take a risk. And there's a really great book called Risky is the New Safe. I forget the author, but I definitely recommend that as well because I think taking risks is what you need to be doing every day. Now, obviously, I don't mean like go jump off or bungee jumping or something way outside your comfort zone. I'm talking about in moderation, right? Everything in moderation, and a risk doesn't have to be some large, gigantic, impossible challenge that you're going to overcome. A risk could just simply be doing something that you want to do and you haven't really had the motivation to do, and you take a chance and you do it, and it doesn't work out, and you feel bad, and you come back the next day and work at it. It could be as you say, being in that room and raising your hand, and just you don't have to steal the show. You can just say something. Expand your comfort zone a millimeter each day, and when you look back, you're going to have a few meters behind you. That's the trick. The trick is to constantly grow in that little capacity. And whether it's the communication skills or technical skills like we talked about, you need to embrace that failure, and you need to just kind of almost I would say almost practically fail every day, which sounds crazy, but it's true. It's do something that you're bad at, learn from it, review it, and get good at it, get back on it, the next day. And, you look back and, where you failed before, suddenly you succeed. There's a few YouTube channels actually that I watch for fun, where I'm not going to plug them, but what they do is they basically play these games where the games are these impossible challenges and it's very stupid or whatever. But what I love about it is they keep at it. So they go through the first challenge, it's a failure, they're anguished and pain, the reaction video, so they drum it up. But they come back at it, and video might be 25, 30 minutes, and by the time you're in the 15-minute mark, they've done 4 of the challenges already. Out of these like maybe 10 challenges, they've done 4 of the challenges. And like, I've learned the pattern is what this. I've learned the pattern. Boom, boom, boom. They go to the challenge. They got on the 5th challenge. They're failing on the 5th challenge, and you go 10 more minutes, and then boom, they're on the 9th challenge. And that to me is what success looks like. The whole time you're failing along the way, you're frustrated, you're upset, you're angry, and then you get to the end, and you're like, oh, it's over. And you're like, oh, that's not fun. I enjoyed it, and that is another big thing about this is success you see is actually the end, and it means you're gonna start a new challenge, and when you look back at it, you're almost like, oh man, I actually really enjoyed that time of life, even though we had all this pain or whatever. And this was frustrating, or this was scary, or I had this rivalry with this individual, or I wasn't sure how to do this. You look back at that and go, actually, you know what? That was really, really worthwhile. So build failure into your life, constructive failure. Don't avoid it. Make it a feature.
Yeah, completely agree. Completely agree. And I think as well something you said there is obviously people when they see that success, they see that as the end. Obviously, a lot of people's success, or a lot of people who might be watching this, their end or their success is becoming a director of emerging technology or a CTO within an organization. But what does that actually look like day to day? What do you actually do on a day-to-day basis when you reach that point?
So on a day-to-day basis, it depends on where you are in the project cycle. For example, this year, we were at a point where Peregrine and even the association, we were in like a foundational mode. So we're doing a lot of investor reach out. We're doing a lot of grant work. We're doing a lot of pitching. We're doing a lot of vision. We're doing a lot of legals. So very, very kind of these are not soft. These we'll call the soft skills. These are more of the hard soft skills, which is actual raising money and going through that. So a day in a life in those weeks could be going through contracts, networking, going to events, doing demonstrations, doing data rooms, doing due diligence, answering questions. Really, really hard days of challenging questions on why this business should exist, how this business is going to make money, what is the edge this business has, et cetera, et cetera. And boy, is there a lot of failure in that. Especially in this environment, because sometimes things are not in control. And then, as we go through that period and we're lucky enough to survive that, then we go into kind of commercials, right? So then we're talking with other peer companies, and we're doing strategic partnerships, we're doing MOUs, we're looking at organizations and how they integrate together and what they do and what we do. Is it complementary? Are we both doing the same thing? And can we kind of, combine forces, on the partnerships? So it's very like commercially focused, very, very heavily commercial. And then there's like the actual technical part of the platform, right? Which is, what does their platform truly do? What are the benefits? What are the challenges with their tech? How does that integrate? What's the actual frameworks that they build? What's the different, let's say, requirements that they meet for data and hosting, SOC 2 and these sort of things, data requirements, cyber requirements, resiliency requirements, architectures come into it. And then, of course, there is actual coding development. What do we actually need to build? How do we resource that, project plan that out? How do we then start hiring and executing for that? How do we test it? How do we deploy it? And then how we get it regulated and bring it live. And so there's a whole belly of actual hardcore engineering and development that happens, architecture that happens, approval processing. And then, of course, in our world, since we're a regulated entity, there's the regulation process. So getting approved to be fit for purpose by the regulator that meets certain requirements, which is additionally challenging. I tell people it's hard enough running a startup, it's even harder to run a regulated startup because everything you do has to be approved, rightly so, by a regulator. So there's always that additional steps. So you got everything. You got the VC side, raising capital. You got the partnership side. You got the commercial side. You got the technology side, new tech. A lot of stuff I do, a lot of research. I read a lot of white papers all the time. So throughout the year, I'm reading white papers from different central banks, from different DeFi projects, from different institutions, new technologies. I'm on YouTube watching conferences. I'm going to conferences. I'm building my concepts up, and especially for my advisors as well, constantly talking to subject matter experts with them and working with them and challenging them and saying, okay, you're giving me this technology. What does it do? Where's it strong? Where's it weak? How's it evolving? Where did it come from? Where's it going? And then also, how do we monetize it now? Can it be monetized now? And then what's the view on that? So it's truly everything. It really depends on what I call the business cycle that you're in, and the way I describe it is, fundraising, right? Initial concept of fundraising, partnerships and commercial, getting clients, sometimes in parallel, actually building, architecting, developing, executing, and testing. And then, of course, going into commercials and open market operations and production, and then actually running the business, and then effectively it repeats, right? We built something, we had a return on value, and then again and again. And that's generally the cycle that I go throughout a year. So different parts of the year, you could watch me work, and you would never know I'm a CTO. You would think I'm a project manager. You would think I'm a developer. You would think I'm an angel investor. You would think I'm a partnerships, a strategic partnerships person. All those hats are worn, and I really enjoy that.
I think that's really, really useful insight. So I think a lot of people listening or watching might think, my career aspiration would be to be a CTO one day, but without necessarily realizing what it actually entails. It's not all fun stuff of, building the actual tech itself and managing the team to deliver the technology. It's everything else that comes along with it, especially as you mentioned, when you're within a startup, you're looking for clients, you're talking to VCs, you're raising money, you're doing all sorts of things that you wouldn't always assume would be the role of a CTO. But I think that's really, really useful insight to share. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would even say for different sizes of business, you're going to have some combination of that and some things you definitely won't do. So I would say if you're the CTO of a large Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000, you're mostly going to be on the strategic side, the compliance side, and the partnership side. You may not actively have to raise money, although sometimes that may happen, right? But primarily, you're going to be a strategic thinker. And there's many CTOs out there that don't code at all. This is actually something that really surprises people. But some CTOs never coded or haven't coded in 20 odd years. And that's, a big thing too with people. It's like, oh, well, you always have to be coding or constantly coding. No, people code for a while and they move on. As you get into like, what I've noticed with CTOs, because one thing I will say, Jack, is when I was this part-time CTO in Chicago, I had the opportunity to join the Microsoft CTO club. I was invited in, and it was a special club, about 30 CTOs in Chicago of all different walks of life. And they recognized me for the work I did and asked me to join them. And it had Fortune 500 CTOs, even Dow 30 CTOs in there, and it had startup CTOs and everywhere from in between. And so people would talk, about their role. And my opener, my corny opener, was no matter who they were, I would get into the elevator with them because, it's one of these nice hotels and they had a lounge on top floor. And I would get into the elevator with them and I would turn to them, not knowing anything about them, and say, how many times have you said no today? And I would always get a laugh of how many times you said no, because that's the role of a CTO is no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. So it is really about knowing the domain, but not every CTO needs to be a developer or a coder. Not every CTO needs to be integrated to raising, but it always helps, right? So, like I said before, they may be running a large bank or institution and working on the strategy side or the commercial side, but you really should have that foundation in coding. You really should have that foundation in startup. You want those skills, and there are people who do vice versa, who were titans of industry and come into startup or come into fintech, especially in Web3. There's a lot of them. And they're hit with, oh, wow, I've been in a bank for 30 years of my life. I never developed my fundraising skills. I never developed my commercial skills. I don't actually know how to go on a roadshow and raise. And that's very common. So, the CTO role, I think, has some common themes, but depending on whether you're in a large institution or a small startup, they could look very different. Small startup, a CTO could be basically a developer that does a few extra things. When people think about a CTO, what they really need to ask themselves is, what do they want to do? Right? Obviously, they want to contribute. They come maybe from a technical background and they want to contribute. But there's things that are unique to CTO that they should want to do, primarily on the commercial and VC and partnership side that should be interesting to them. And they don't always have to code throughout their whole lives. In fact, it's a struggle even for me at this point. I have to take time out of my day to code or to do a project purposely. In fact, I'll seek projects in my advisor just to keep my coding skill sets fresh. Because that's something that's important to me. Not everyone does that. So I think that's important too. Is what you want to be CTO, but a CTO where, at what level? Because then you're going to have different skills that you may need to pick up or focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. I know hundreds of CTOs who haven't coded in 10, 15 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, even I know tons of engineering managers as well who haven't coded really. It just depends on the size of the organizations that they work with and how that organization views those particular positions really. They do vary so much from place to place. And
I just think it's very hard to code. I think this is another like really, really great topic in my career that I've always struggled with is, I came up as coding was my edge, going back to earlier in our conversation and my relationship with coding and, priding myself on being able to walk into any place in New York and, do a really difficult coding exercise, whiteboards and all this sort of stuff, or having, the ability to read code. To me, it never leaves you. It's like riding a bicycle, like if you do enough years. But I think like anything else, you weren't born as a coder. It's something you do for a while, and then I think it's okay to grow out of it. And that's something that I think terrifies a lot of people who go into that or pursue CTO or executive roles is they realize that they, things that they would scoff at, PowerPoints, emails, meetings, or whatever, that becomes the job. That is the job. You're not going to be in IntelliJ or Visual Studio Code listening to, some awesome beats and coding for 6 hours, uninterrupted. You could do that as a startup, but, you're CTO in name only at that point. So I think it's something that if you want to code throughout your career, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, right? I think it's something where if you want to be heavily coding and want a little leadership, that there's other options for you as being an engineering manager or VP of engineering, and that's totally great careers, absolutely. So I think everyone has to make their own decision with it, but I do believe that eventually people kind of grow out of it. Mostly, there's always going to be that coder that is a savant and loves it and wants to do it the rest of their life. Great. In fact, many times they will fight promotions. They will fight going up. And what they have to then do is seek places that are very, very advanced, places that truly challenge their skills. What you don't want to do is get comfortable, like get complacent. Oh, I code. I know how to code. I go to work every day. I don't have to think about things. I'm fine. That's complacency. That's the danger zone. If you're bored at work or you're at a point where you're not even thinking about it, because I've seen it too. Like especially on Wall Street, you got a lot of these guys who will work as a contractor, as a Java developer or C++ developer for a year or so. Then they're right back out on the market and they're trying to get a 20% raise, 20% raise. And many, many times you look at their resume and they're in the same job for 15 years, just at 10 different places. And you're like, well, I'm next. You're going to be here for a year and a half. I'm going to pour all my knowledge into you, and then you're just going to pop off to another guy, another person. So I think that if you are going to pursue coding as a career full time, you should seek challenges and you should seek big challenges where you can grow your skills materially or get to a position where you can innovate those skills and become a thought leader in that space. I think that's very rewarding, right? But if life is calling on you to evolve and take on new roles, you should embrace that as well. Just the way there was a time where you embraced learning coding, you should also embrace, moving on from coding if that's right for you. And I think it's a big struggle. Even for me, it's a big fundamental struggle because I haven't even gotten rid of coding myself. I still have one hand firmly, tied. Like yesterday, for 4 or 5 hours, I was writing a project in Solidity for a patent I'm doing with a client. And I was going to myself, I was like, enjoy this because this may be the last project I ever work on that I could just sit there for a few hours and just code and listen to music.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big thing too, people that have to decide for themselves.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I see it all the time. People who um, have either moved into management and really, really missed the coding side of it and then go back to coding just because that's what they really, really enjoy. And I see other people who it happens the other way. They're kind of desperate to get into the management side of things because they've just had enough of coding. But I think if you are going to make the move from
Right.
coding into management, you do have to see it as a brand new career. It can't really be an extension of the coding career. Almost like you have to view it as, right, I'm entering this new phase of my career, my life. The skills I'm learning now aren't to do with the technical side of things. I'm not deep in the code. I'm looking after the people. I'm managing the people. I'm leading on projects. As you mentioned, I'm looking at timelines, project deliverables. I'm out of the detail now, and that needs to be the focus really if you're going to kind of succeed. So yeah, I see it go
Absolutely.
both ways.
I
Yeah.
couldn't
So
agree more. I think that's a really great point.
So as you touched on there, you have a couple of and obviously we spoke about at the start. You have a number of side things going on, and you're advisor to all sorts of different projects. What is it that you're working on the tokenization side of things for Polygon? Are you doing similar things for R3 and Layer Zero at the moment? What is it that you're doing with them?
Yeah. So I think that these are all relationships that were personal, that are developed into business relationships. And I think this is a big skill of a CTO is to network with people and to not want that instant gratification. The R3 and, others, I've had those relationships for years, but we're only an advisor recently and only when it made sense for specific projects. And I think a big overall theme that I could safely talk about publicly is the interest in the Middle East and the interest of what's going on in Abu Dhabi and the EDGM. And I could say that a lot of friends who at first I had to explain why I was in Abu Dhabi because I live in New York, and most of the time I'm in New York and London. Why am I over there? And obviously DeFi and blockchain has always been a global phenomenon, right? There's hotspots in Lisbon, in Singapore this week, and obviously now we're seeing Japan and Korea really, well, Korea always, but especially Tokyo and Japan really kind of pop up. And so Abu Dhabi and Dubai as well was always kind of like a really hot spot for it, but more on the crypto side. Abu Dhabi, looking at its brother Emirate, said, we're going to take a similar but different path. We're going to do a real world assets and tokenization. Um, and so, in that interest and the opportunity they created, a lot of my colleagues and friends and contacts in my world have expressed interest in moving into that region and learning the region. And they know I've been doing that now for almost 2.5 years. And so
Okay.
yeah, that's really the big impetus for that. But there's also other projects that I work on, obviously, where I lend them my expertise, from my career. There, it just in general, and I think it's a pity. In general, Web3 is a very young crowd. Not to say that I'm so old, but I have older people meeting in the crowd. But by and large, the rank and file and traditional finance have stayed put. There's actually quite few of us when you think about holistically the entire size of Wall Street, how many people who were at like some sort of really serious level at a serious place left that and went into Web3. There's maybe,
Not
I
many.
don't know, less than 20,000 people in the world that have actually done that. And I'm being very, very generous with that number, right? Because I meet new people every day. But I'll say even less than 10,000 people, that done it. So, which is obviously absurdly small fraction when you think about the size of DeFi and everything. And so many times I'll come in and they're engaging with large institutions, and they don't really have that background knowledge of what actually goes, not necessarily inside, but like what are their purpose, the general stuff, right? The table stakes, like what do they do? Why do they do it? What are their challenges? Generally, that's always a big thing. And then vice versa is like, well, here's what we do. Would they be interested in, or is that something? Again, it's very much that partnership, commercial building, but it's all very technical, right? Here's some piece of technical stuff we build, we'll just translate and vice versa. So you have, so to recap, you have, my own background in it, my own expertise. I bring a very serious level to my engagements. Obviously, I only pick projects that I know won't be frauds or won't be pump and dump scams and stuff like that. Which I don't know if you saw the action on Banana yesterday on Twitter,
I
but
did.
that was
Yeah.
yeah. That's the stuff that scares me is because there's sometimes there's good people behind these projects that mean well, but they don't come from these backgrounds or they don't have sufficient knowledge. And you can on Wall Street, your reputation, your word is everything, right? You can destroy your reputation in a moment if you recommend something like that. So there's that. I almost got like a filter for projects to people. Then second of all is the larger macro pivot into Abu Dhabi and virtual assets regulatory authority, or VARA as we call that, Dubai, and tokenizing assets in that regime, which is a whole other topic. And then, of course, as I mentioned, kind of like a translator between the two worlds from a technical point of view or like a commercial point of view that tends to be very helpful for them by and large.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Thank you for talking through that. It's interesting. You get involved in all sorts of stuff. I'm not sure how you have the time to do everything you do, really. What were some of the biggest challenges that you face? You mentioned that there, more guys from the more traditional finance side of things, kind of coming into the Web3 space. Are there any particular challenges that you face that really stand out to you?
This year, the challenge has very much been cleaning up the mess that 2022 left. The market and the VC market, the derivatives market, I think were structurally destroyed in a catastrophic way. Um, the biggest challenge has been this is year actually. Interesting enough, I personally have said to my friends and family that this has been the most challenging year of my career, bar none. You have a tech environment where it's the worst layoffs since 2000 in the dot com bubble. We've had probably a close to 50% contraction in digital assets. That includes a lot of my friends and colleagues at traditional banks being let go or made redundant and projects closing. People obviously being victims of some very public and very serious scams at size. and we're seeing those things play out. And so trying to survive in that environment when there's some very real questions and there's a little bit of guilt by association by far has been the most difficult thing. I think even just surviving the business this year is an accomplishment of itself. And I usually don't like defensive accomplishments. I like, kind of like growth accomplishments, so we grow or whatever. But just trying to scratch, claw, fight our way through a very, very difficult set of circumstances that has really not stopped. I mean, people don't realize, when you raise interest rates, it's like culling the herd, right? And who gets culled? It's the old, right? The businesses that really were operating on the thinnest of margins or super leverage and really couldn't, make it another day. And it's the young, unfortunately. And Web3 was a very young, is a very young industry. It's very hypersensitive to VC investment, and VCs went in heavy. And again, for all the projects that we know and read about in the news, they took a lot of hits with that. And I think there was a statistic in January that said in crypto, VC activity was down 90% year over year. And maybe it's improved, but not that much. I mean, you just look at the news and we're still in consolidation mode, unfortunately. And so this to me was the first bear market. In the last crypto bear market, I was still in the banks. I was still on the traditional side. So I was more observer. This was one of the first ones where, we really were in a little dinghy in the middle of the Atlantic, getting tossed around kind of deal. And we still are. And so just surviving and realizing that the skills that you conjured need to even be improved, strengths that are not strong enough, that's a hard thing to swallow. That's a hard thing to swallow. And so, you ask me, how do you have time for it? You make a choice for yourself. Either you make the time for it and you make it work, or you die. You don't survive, or you go back. And I refuse to go back for a variety of reasons. But I think that dealing with a very difficult environment, sharpening our value props, sharpening our partnerships, making the platform more compelling has been a huge challenge, and we're only starting out to reap the rewards of that challenge, which is effectively survivor's bias. I have an analogy that I use for a few of my friends that I've been using about the industry. I said, you can think of Peregrine as a humble little, vegetable shop at an American strip mall, and have the big Target and Walmart, and maybe you have all the food stores and all the really fun stores, and you don't notice the little vegetable shop. Well, when the big grocery store goes out and all the other stores get burned out, and you drive up to the strip mall and there's like 2 or 3 stores open, suddenly you notice the little vegetable shop. And so, that's been a challenge for survival. I would say another major challenge that's secular is the origination of assets. It is a very, very difficult thing to get assets, to get real investors, institutions on public infrastructure. That has been a major challenge for us. And even though we exist in a really great region and a really fair regulator that I would say gives us the option to do that under the right circumstances, it still has not been an easy embracement at all. And I think there's still a lot of hesitation, rightly or wrongly, about the embracement of this technology. And that has always been true. Blockchain, especially under digital assets and tokenization side, has always had this hesitation, where other innovations have had kind of like accelerant, people like run towards it, like you see with chatbot GPT. For a variety of very good reasons, there's always been sort of this, hesitancy to embrace it by large asset managers. They are talking. They're very smart. So we've been finding product and finding participants is always a major challenge, and they're out there for sure. We are signing deals, but it's a very, very I don't want to say difficult sales cycle, but it's a very challenging sales cycle. A lot of it doesn't have anything to do with that. I mean, a lot of it just has to do with where the economy is, where we are in this, recession, depression, or whatever you want to call it. Certainly in crypto, we're in depression. I think we contracted 50%, like I said. So the goal is to survive, and I think that's part of the CTO being glamorous. It's not. It's not. In many ways, there's times where I was like, when the hardest thing I had to deal with was how to engineer a pattern or to understand an algorithm. As frustrating and as upsetting that was, I still didn't think about, the bigger existential stuff. As a CTO, you are responsible for not only yourself, but for, the people you employ. And when you employ a lot of people like I do, it's more than hey, like this is a cool little hobby thing to get right. You have to literally make the reality that you envision in many ways, and that takes a lot of failure. So that's been the biggest challenge. I wish I could say things. I think things have gotten a little bit better, but they're not at the point where, let's say, in 2021, where we were, gangbusters. And I don't know if those. I hope those times come back. I do, but I think it might be a little bit longer. And so, in that capacity, shifting what is success and shifting your mindset is the hardest thing to do.
Yeah, that's really good insight. I've definitely probably over the last 2 or 3 months, I've definitely noticed an uptick in the amount of projects that are hiring, the amount of roles out there, the projects that are hiring. So that's normally or usually a fairly good indicator of people's confidence in the
Yeah.
market, or people's confidence in maybe their funding, or maybe they've been able to receive a little bit more funding or raise more money, whatever it might be. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, over the next 6 to 12 months. Hopefully, we'll be kind of back on the up, and back where we all want to be. But no, it's I can imagine it's been tricky building in the bear market, and trying to survive through that. To be honest, and
Yeah.
if someone is stepping into Web3 then for the first time, are there certain expectations of the industry that you can share, or is there any advice for someone who is looking to build a career in the space?
Yeah, tons of absolutely. First of all, good job. You did the right thing because, like I said, you want to be on the side of innovation. You don't want to be the one sitting there going, "Oh, maybe it's going to work out or not going to work out." It's going to work out. Just bar none. Even if the entire digital assets industry collapsed, the fact that you have these global projects with some of the smartest people in the world working in many cases just on tokens or on grants or even for free or bounties or whatever to build this is a deeper social societal thing. This is not a technology that's going to fail. Certainly, we've in 2022 demonstrated that we certainly have tried, but there's a deeper thing happening here. There's a deep evolution, and so I've seen a lot of the memes on Twitter, and they are funny, like, oh, I was a blockchain developer, now suddenly I'm data science and AI. What I say to people is, don't get tricked because every technology will have its challenges. Every technology will have its periods of ebbs and flows. When I was in NASA, working at NASA, when I was in aerospace, was one of the worst times ever because the space shuttle was being sunset, NASA's budget was being cut, and I had the opportunity to go work at SpaceX. And I said, no, I want to go on Wall Street. And that was right for me. I don't regret that. But you could have looked at those years and say, oh, man, that sucks. You got to do your dream at NASA. And, well, now you have to go out to Hawthorne and work at SpaceX. And yeah, but look at SpaceX now, right? No one remembers, those days. It's a similar thing with this. People are not going to, people in tech didn't become tech until the dot-com bubble. Like that whole culture around Google and Facebook didn't happen until like the huge crash in 2000, right? This is something that I think happens with nascent industries, unfortunately. It isn't always one to one in terms of this is exactly how it's going to go. But you have to look at what we're doing here and see where else are you going to get the similar benefits, right? Eventually, a lot of the scam projects are going to be flushed out. Eventually, the right projects are going to succeed. Like I remember back in 2018, the biggest thing was CryptoKitties, and now look at NFTs, or what they were, with Bored Ape Yacht Club and all the other ones, right? And there was a whole craze, and that's now since I guess crashed or whatever. I don't follow NFTs. But the point being is that if you had looked at CryptoKitties back in the day and said, well, NFTs are not going to work out there, and walk away, those guys who stuck around, had a good year last year. I don't know if all of them made money, but they did. So you want to get involved. You cannot avoid suffering. You cannot avoid setback. If you constantly run from if anything that's hot or cool, you're ultimately going to rob yourself of what we talked about before about failure. You're just going to ride this constant wave of success, and you're going to be left with nothing because eventually everything turns over. So even in financing investment, there's a whole area called value investing, right? And you have to go back to what those principles are, which is ask yourself, do I fundamentally believe that Web3 and blockchain is going to fail? If you generally believe that, then yes, off you go to several other great initiatives going on in the world, right? But if you don't, and I don't, then you'll look at this and go, this is a major setback. It was very fragile, right? There's a lot of things that were built in the last few years that were probably, how do I say, illusions of growth that certainly have come past. But there's still an industry here, there's still a skill set here. And so, it's going to be one of those things where you get your bear market scars, you get through the process, you survive. And then when things are great, you'll appreciate them that much more. Because just like we were in 2022 or early 2022, where we thought, the party was never going to end. All these guys were bigger than ever. We had a couple of, seizures with Terra Luna and others, but, they were like, yeah, whatever, that's over there. It's not going to affect the whole thing. And then boom, within a matter of months, everything changed. Well, as things change down in a matter of months, things can pop right back up. We may have the best November, December ever coming up. We have no idea, but that's what you have to make yourself available to. So the time to get involved, the time to join these things, believe it or not, is in the down cycles, because you may enter at a valuation of yourself that's lower than what you want, but I guarantee it will pay off when things do return. And things will return. That is the business cycle. By definition, things will get better. And like I said, as long as you have that large community of people, which frankly you do, you go to conferences, they're still packed. Even though people have gotten their scars, they're still packed. You have a really great conference season, even this week with Token 2049, you have permissionless, all these things, people are still attending it, right? Yes, a lot of people have left the industry, true. But a lot of people leave a lot of industries, and a lot of people are coming into this industry. So I think you want to join now. You want to ask yourself fundamentally, why am I here? What am I doing? And then you also want to have a longer term view, which is eventually things are going to turn around, as they always do.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And then, I kind of felt a lot of that myself. Obviously, I launched Unveil, my recruitment agency, in August of last year, which is, some people look at that and think probably fairly bad timing to launch a recruitment business that only recruits Web3 roles. But no, it's been a really good time to build, to be honest. You're able to speak to a lot of people. You're allowed to share, or you can share kind of similar stories, and people are really willing to have conversations with you. And obviously everyone wants to kind of help and kind of boost up the industry and stuff, I guess. So it's been a fun time to build, not without its stresses, of course, but that comes with everything, right? So, and if someone is stepping into a leadership role for the first time, then any advice you could share with them there? So you mentioned that you've hired tons of people before and managed people and led people. What advice do you have for someone who's in that sort of role?
If you can, network. Tell people around that you've gotten into a new leadership role, lobby to go to conferences and events, get out there, take advantage of that title you've earned, that respect that you've earned, and realize that your ability to make connections with people are capital. People are resources, people are money, right? Meeting different people, building that Rolodex, as we like to call it, is the single most important thing. Rely on your team to do the due diligence, do your work in terms of the planning, what needs to be done, but don't stop there. Don't sit there and watch them. Trust them. Go out there and make connections. Ask people about acquaintances or partners they have, or ask about old initiatives that were abandoned a year ago. I mean, certainly one of the best things I've done is within the people that remain in our company, I would ask everyone, hey, who do we talk to that we haven't talked to in a while? And this person, that person. I say, hey, let's talk another conversation with them. Let's see if things have changed. Going to different events and networking. People are all, what's amazing about the bear market is that you'll find is that everyone's in the same boat to some degree. We're all looking for business, we're all looking for investment, and we're all kind of in this like let's all help each other. And in a way, it's almost like a golden age for leadership because it's so obviously difficult for everybody, so challenging. There's almost this sentiment of like let's just all help each other because right now we're our backs up against the wall, right?
Yeah.
And I
And it won't
love
be like
that
that
because
forever.
no, no. In fact, now is your time to make those relationships to cement that you are there. Because what's going to happen is people are going to get success. They're going to, they're going to like understand who was there during the tough times, who came later during the easy times, and the relationships you build during tough times are always so much stronger. So my advice is get out there. Get noticed on social media, do engagements, go networking, go to conferences if you can. If you can't do conferences because they're expensive, do something local in your area, but just pump your network. Network is my biggest advice to you. Everyone's in the same position, and I think you'll surprise yourself of what you can do with other people. And then the next thing is work harder than you ever have worked before, because look at this as a window of opportunity, that's passing where you're kind of in this goodwill space with everybody. Because as you mentioned, Zach, once things turn around and get better, people will start to silo off again. So you really want to memorialize those relationships when you still can, when the opportunity is there, versus when it's booming and everyone's doing their own thing again, and it's much harder to meet people you normally couldn't meet. It's like you ever go to a party and if the party's booming, tons of people, you can't talk to anyone because music's too loud. Versus if you go to a party and there's 10 stragglers left and everyone's like looking for a good time and there's only 10 of you, chances are you're actually going to have a better time, right? Because you're actually going to talk to everyone and listen to them. So it's kind of like that. Like the music stopped, it's a mess. We're all here cleaning it up. So come in and help clean up the mess and you'll meet a lot of cool people and they'll remember you. Again, cute little analogy, but that's the point. Is that's what I would do, and in fact that's what I'm doing, and a lot of others are doing right now, and it certainly is paying off.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. To be honest, that's the first time on the podcast that someone's talked about networking as the main thing that they could advise. Really, I think that's a really good way of looking at it, especially at the moment because we are so young in the Web3 industry and everyone is trying to help each other still. Really take advantage of that because at some point the mindset will change when Web3 is big enough and everyone will start to become more people probably are competitive now, but people will become more competitive and less likely to help each other as the industry grows because people will be competing for market share and this kind of stuff, right?
Well, I think
Potentially.
Jack, to your point is it's like you asked me earlier in the podcast, like, hey, what does the day in life look like for you, right? So for me, it's not that I'm against building or whatever. That time will come. So in other words, you're in a part of the business cycle right now where everyone's trying to get something commercial done, some funding done as a leader, right? Because I'm assuming that if you have a team, they're building, tech or whatever, but there will come a time when you make those deals or you build those partnerships that you just won't have the time to go to conferences. You won't have the time to go out there and meet people because you'll have your deal, you have your funding, and then you'll just be building, and you have to focus on that, right? That's the thing is like you're in different modes of operation. So it is yes, people. I agree with all your points. The way I look at it is people will get their deals done and then they'll get into build mode and then you won't have that opportunity to cross paths with them until they emerge from that. And believe me, a lot of people are in build mode. People who've done deals early in the year, I don't see them in the conference cycle as much. Why? Because they got their deal and they're doing their thing. For me, for our team, we did our build. We're now into that commercial side. But myself, I might have another few weeks of just, conferences and networking. And then I already have a few deals already papered that, we're going to be building into it's next year. So it's more like you just want to take advantage of the environment, right? You take advantage of the environment. The networking thing, I say that because there's a window for it. And I think that's another really good point I want to impress to people is you're constantly in the state of change, especially as a leader. One month you're doing networking, next month you might be doing engineering, next month you might be doing legals, right? So you always have to. I think what's advice to people I could say is self-reflect always. You chances are you have an instinct You know how to get things done. You ask yourself, what do I think I should be doing now? Or ask people around, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? Get advice. Because I guarantee you it's always changing, right? So these things that happen, it's not like in forever, indefinitely just sit there and go to conferences and network all the time. No, go there with purpose, get what you need, and then switch into a different mode of operation. I think that to me is where a lot of people who are successful can do so. They focus on what's needed right then and now, what's relevant, and then they constantly stay on what's relevant. A lot of engineers and people who come from a development background love knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Oh, I learned this or that, and then they never use it. And so for me, that practical application of knowledge, and then knowing importantly when you need the information, how you apply the information, but most importantly, when you no longer need that information, when you no longer need to, when you need to change up the game. And honestly, that's something I legitimately ask myself almost every week. I don't say every day because that's a bit crazy, but I ask myself every week, like, okay, let me take a step back and look at all the things happening in my life or happening across my companies and advisories. Where do I need to pivot? What has changed in this sort of game that I need to now focus on? Do I need to go into engineering mode? Do I need to go in architect mode? Well, all the things we talked about, right? Do I need to continue the mode I'm in? So the advice I give to folks about the networking is true today, but realize it may not be true for them for tomorrow. And I think that's even more valuable is constantly self-reflect, constantly evolve on your meta.
Yeah, that's really, really useful. Is there any advice that you wish you'd have been told earlier in your career?
Risky is the new safe, without a doubt. I really wish I had much more of a background in VC. To me, the single biggest gap in my knowledge that has affected my career is, I won't say the inability, but the inexperience in raising capital by far. I would say to people that if there's one skill to master in your life, it is to raise capital, VC, grants, whatever. I always thought that the money would be there because of my technical skills or someone else would deal with it. Someone else would figure out for me. And for those lucky enough to have someone that does that, congratulations, you've absolutely won the lottery. But raising money, I think, is something that's not taught in school. Like financial education in America is not that great to begin with. But even when you go to courses in business administration or finance, you'll learn a lot about index investing or the economy or interest rates. And that's great if you're an economist at some think tank in DC or you're a head chief economist at a fund or a large bank. But if you're like all the other mere mortals in this world, your inability to raise money for your own ideas will be the single biggest thing that holds you back by far. And I've noticed that throughout my years, I've met very smart people. In fact, even people at high level positions. And one thing that always really hurt them late into their career, I'm talking about like executives at banks and others, and again, it's not blankets for those who wish it, because they didn't build that network of VCs. They didn't build that skill of pitching and raising money, really, really hurt them later in life because they're like, hey, I have the idea, I know how to execute, but I don't have the network of VCs. Maybe I have a few buddies that made a few bucks along the way. That's great for angel, but I'm actually talking about like the actual process. So it's a very ugly skill. It's a very difficult skill. It's, talk about embracing failure. You will get punched in the face, I promise you. But it is a necessary skill, and it's something that I wish was taught. And people need to realize, VCs as well, they struggle. They are not. They claim to be subject matter experts, and may have a subject matter expert. They may have a view that doesn't align with yours, and navigating all of that, and even the deal flow. I mean, it's not even like you get the yes, and then like, oh, I got a yes, and I got a check now. I'll figure out. No, there's all sorts of stuff where they may say, yeah, we agree, and then you're doing like a contract for 2 months and getting to numbers, and people talk about numbers may be uncomfortable, and terms of settlement and equity. So I really think no matter, even if you tend to be a developer your entire life, I just personally believe that the lack of education around VC engagement, how to engage with them, how to talk with them, how to build that network, and then ultimately how to raise money, consistently raise money, I think has been a major, major missing point to a lot of people's, especially mine. Because, you think a guy who grew up in finance, working on options derivatives, stock loan, equities, everything in between, you think, oh, yeah, raising money. no big deal. Mm-mm. Raising money is probably one of the hardest things I've ever seen do, especially in this environment. And what bothers me more is that the people who are good at raising money um, generally don't have the best intention or project in mind. And I can't tell you how frustrated I often get where I see smart people who like that skill set who would do great projects, and then I see people who are just very good at grifting VCs, building a very nice story, create, because they have just that skill. They have the ability to raise money, but not execute or anything else as well. It's very frustrating to me. And so I think for anyone listening to this, definitely dedicate some time, get curious, become familiar with how to raise money. Because if you can raise money for yourself, you will shift in your thinking. You will no longer think, oh, I need a job, right? You'll like, oh, I have an engagement, I can advise, I can have this project I can raise, and that becomes my income, that becomes my sustenance. Ultimately, that's how you build wealth, is being in that co-founder position, right? You'll have far more wealth and reward in life if you learn that skill and benefit from the equity of that company versus being an individual, employer contributor and maybe getting a material bonus or some sort of compensation. I really think that's an important part. So obviously, a lot of people who listen to this are in the startup space, or maybe even part of a small team. No matter where you are, just get smart around VC, get the knowledge, practice, and try it out, because I think down the road it'll pay really, really great dividends. And if you are a startup, even all the better, because if you want to learn and contribute, and you have someone who's very good at VC and clearly has raised the money to pay your salary, that's a huge asset you have right there in your roof. And engage those people and talk to them, and take advantage of that talent that you may not realize that we talk about, like that practicing CTO, right? The startup CTOs, and you mentioned a lot of jobs and started in startup DeFi. Absolutely, but someone raised that money, right? That to me is a beautiful skill, and I really think people need to take advantage of it and learn from the people right next to them on that. Not just the technical stuff, because technical stuff is always great, but because they raised that money and paid your salary, then the technical stuff can happen. So that's my one big thing, and that's something that I probably will continue to focus on into my years.
That's definitely a skill that I don't possess either, and I'd love to learn and love to develop. I have plans one day that I'd love to raise money and grow and scale the recruitment
Yeah.
business, and have teams across every continent and be the biggest recruitment company into the Web3 space. That's my goal, I guess. So yeah, very difficult to do that organically, I think. Possible, obviously, in recruitment it's definitely possible, but yeah, having the skill to be able to raise money is definitely something I don't possess. I wouldn't even know where to start, I'll be honest with you.
Well,
I'd probably
what are we
approach it as
talking
if I
about?
would do, yeah, like I'd probably approach it like I would do a business development list. I'd be picking up the phone and trying to speak to as many people as possible, not really knowing what they wanted to hear or what they wanted to listen to, or how I even would create a deck to look at to impress them, right? So yeah, that whole piece is such a massive thing to learn.
I think it's a beautiful example of ask your friends, right? Friends and colleagues who may, hey, have you raised? Do you have any advice? Use your tools, right? There's Udemy out there, right? If you go on Udemy, there's some really, really great courses. That person I've watched that talk about how do you build your sales deck? How do you make your pitch? How do you network with VCs? What should you know about, right? If you prefer reading, there's really great books out there. It's like anything else. It's like a skill set, and you start the journey not knowing anything, and slowly over the years you build up. I think the other thing that VCs actually do appreciate is they like having a network themselves too. They like having people on their radar. In fact, one of the things I think they enjoy most about their jobs are people that go to them is like, hey, I don't have a project right now, but I just want us to talk. I just want you to know me and me to know you. And, what are you working on? And, this is what I'm working on. And maybe one day I'll raise money. Oh, okay, cool. And it's not going to be like, they're going to be captivated, but they know you. It's a little, what we call a little like data points, right? So I think that building that network of VCs and vice versa, there's tremendous value that people bring to VCs, because VCs are people as well, right? They need knowledge. They need people to staff their projects. They need subject matter expertise. They many times need reputation, someone seriously, right? Like VCs are also comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes. You have startup VCs, right? Guys who raise, a diminished amount of $5 million and says, how do we invest this smartly? They need people to help them. Or, as recruiters, I always tell them, well, one, you have a great selling skill set. And then number two, you talk to so many people. So imagine like your network multiplier, right? Because you're out there talking to startups anyway who are looking for jobs. And if they're looking for jobs, guess what? They're funded. If they're funded, maybe they're raising more. VCs hate to lead. Leading for a VC is the most difficult thing, but they love to pile on. The VC thing is asymmetric. I mean, this is something that if you raise money, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You will grind for that leader, and then a little less of a grind for the next one. And then like when you have two or three or four, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 come in, and suddenly now you're pushing people away. And that's what I experienced this year. It's majority of the year was grind. You can't just find one. And suddenly we found a few, and then now we'll see at the next valuation. So to me, actually, I always find recruiters and VCs very complementary because you're a very like network intensive industry. And I always find benefit too in talking to recruiters and people in the space saying, hey, what do you see in the industry? You have tremendous amount of market intelligence, right, that people will benefit from. And so you can monetize that, not just by finding people roles or filling procurements, but also, hey, listen, I have a VC that would love to talk to you. Great, now you're doing cap intro. It's just another way. You're already making the phone calls anyway. What's just another band, right? It just goes into diversifying your income streams and that whole discipline. So, but this is exactly why I brought it up, because as soon as you start looking at, oh, hey, I haven't thought about VCs, and then suddenly all the ideas flow in of like all the ways you can monetize it and diversify, and then you're like, oh, well, actually, what I do, there's a lot more value to it than just finding placements, right? And I think that's always exciting.
Yeah, for sure. I'll have to pick your brains off camera if that's all right, and ask you a ton of questions. But Dennis, taking it back to I guess to Web3. You've spoken about all the things that you really like about the space. You talked about how you originally got into Web3 at the start of the podcast. If there was something that you could change about the Web3 space, does anything spring to mind?
Oh, tons. Yeah. I mean, for me, the biggest thing is I'd probably be controversial in saying this, but there's a lot of scams in the space. There's just a lot of scams. There's a lot of pump and dump. And there's this kind of perception that of like DeFi and Web3 are sort of like fresh and new, and all this sort of stuff has never been done before. When the reality is that we have close to 100 years of market manipulation that I see in practice on a daily basis. And I really do wish for smart regulation. I really do wish for an embracement in the US of this industry. I mean, certainly I love Abu Dhabi. I love the opportunities there. But, of course, living in New York and whatever, it's very frustrating that, we can't go as fast or as aggressive as we can in other areas. So I definitely would like, one, to see far less scams. I think they really hurt. And this sort of naiveness that, people haven't tried this before, they have. In fact, there's entire books that a lot of my TradFi guys will send me an article about some pump and dump scam or something else. I'm like, oh, we used to do this in the 90s in Japan or something like that. Like, look how cute what you guys are doing, and just sort of like this backhanded compliment that like Web3 and blockchains, rediscovering finance all over again. So I would definitely like for less scams. I would definitely like for better regulators and a better regulated environment in the U.S. For sure. And then I also really wish there was more of less of a tepidness about public infrastructure and more of an embracement of it. I think that we built a world on the internet, and I think we've forgotten what that view was back in the early 90s of this kind of like open, decentralized network that was the internet. No one owned the internet, but suddenly everyone's getting worried about like who owns the blockchain, this sort of stuff. And I just think it's quite backwards in that sort of way. So those are my three. I certainly have a lot more than that because I think if there were less scams and more legitimate projects, I think it would help the perception of the industry overall. I think the lack of regulatory clarity has caused a lot of weeds to grow in the space. And, one of the biggest things is, Coinbase and others, there's a lot of interest in trading perpetuals and derivatives in the crypto space. And it's naive to think that, a savvy investor who's worked on Wall Street, myself included, can't either, have friends or have second addresses outside, pay our taxes and everything like that on this, but, don't want access to crypto derivatives trading. Meanwhile, a lot of these foreign exchanges, allow that to happen. They did like KYC. Obviously, the CFTC and SEC is taking enforcement action, but the problem isn't the enforcement action. The problem is the environment created where people can't access the crypto market the way they want to in a safe manner. And so, they perpetuated this sort of, unfortunately, crime. And unfortunately led to one of the biggest mishaps in our industry, if ever. The other thing was, tolerance of these large coins, scam coins. We used to think that, okay, the ICO tokens are somewhat harmless, but in reality, many of the frauds that took place were really empowered by these tokens and continue to be. And that's the fault of the regulator for clearly people want to issue assets. Clearly people want to raise capital. They want access to capital. They want access to wealth and to ability to grow wealth. And we're doing a very poor job of enabling that, which I think is un-American, believe it or not. And I think it's a very sad day that people, especially Americans, see greater opportunity overseas right now than within our own borders. And I think that's very unfortunate. I think that while the regulations have been fantastic, I think certain regulations that were under the guise of protecting investors simply don't, simply do not, or overly hardened. And I think there's nothing wrong with trying to achieve wealth, especially if you don't have a lot of wealth. We certainly have the concept of fractional stocks. You could buy a stock for $100, regardless if you have. Why not for crypto, or why not decentralize the ability to raise? I mean, certainly people have mechanisms to do so. So I really, really believe that other countries are taking advantage of the environment that's created in the U.S. right now. I think it's unsustainable, and I think a lot more is at stake than we realize. I think when there's this idea that, when the U.S. comes online, or gets its act together, everyone's just going to come back, and that's not guaranteed. It takes years and millions of dollars to build these things. Even Peregrine took us 4 years and well over $10 million to get to where we are, right? And if you look on paper, we're, quote, air quotes, tokenizing assets on public blockchains like Polygon, right? Why would we pivot into the US? And even the companies that are there in the US right now are suffering. They just are, and they're looking for opportunities outside. So I think that would be my biggest thing, is the regulatory environment in the US, because I think it's at the core root of a lot of the scams, a lot of the trepidation with institutions. And unfortunately, I think there needs to be a change in leadership. I will say this, is I do read a lot of the U.S. Treasury's reports. I read a lot of OFAC's reports. I read a lot of the central bank, the Fed, Boston Fed. The rank and file, the bureaucracies of these institutions get it. They really do. They're really putting out some great literature, some great thoughts on this. And it's frustrating to see the divergence in the really great thinking and the frameworks being proposed, and sort of the narrative that exists in the media and with the leadership. And I think that needs to change. And I think it needs to change now, because I think if you let the people who are writing these reports and creating these frameworks lead from what they're proposing, I think we really can get something good out there that's workable. So it is a very frustrating time for me, especially with this. So long answer to a short question, but I think it's something that's very important, especially if you're getting involved in this industry. It's important you need to understand the dynamics of why things the way they are, right? Why is this stuff happening in Abu Dhabi and in Singapore? Why isn't it really happening in New York or San Francisco or LA, or and to a lesser extent Miami? It's because of these regulations, and understanding that can really give you an edge.
Do you think that the perception of the industry has a big part to play in that? Obviously, there's
Yes.
tons of meme coins and tons of scams and this kind of stuff, which gives the impression to anyone who's not in Web3, it gives the impression that it's not a serious industry. It's not a serious place to be. When actual fact, when you're in it, there are tons of cool projects building some amazing cutting edge tech, tons of the infrastructure and uh, distributed like cloud storage, or whatever it might be. Yeah, do you think that has a huge part to play in the regulations? I just kind of think,
Absolutely.
oh, it's not a quote unquote like real industry that we need to worry about type thing.
Without a doubt, without a doubt, and look, I don't want to be the one poo poo at the party, but like the Bitcoin culture and the zeitgeist in crypto, by and large, is a very young culture. It's a very young demographic. It's a very party demographic. It has a horrible reputation. I mean, people's lives have literally been destroyed in mass by it. I mean, look at like the banana coin yesterday. I mean, first of all, it's named banana, right? So that's not serious. Second of all, it had a major smart contract flaw with the taxes being kept with the transfers, which was, again, how was that not caught? And people's hard-earned money livelihood have been destroyed. I mean, there's entire subreddits and parts of Twitter you could read and where people, the victims actually talk about. I think the canonical story is, I didn't tell my wife. Maybe it's a meme, but I know it to be true personally to a few people. Portion of their mortgage, all their assets going all in some sort of altcoin that they were told about, or going all in into an exchange they were told about, only for it to be completely destroyed, or a lending protocol or lending platform that I knew personally getting completely wiped out, right? I mean, there are some serious, serious wounds in this industry, right? I mean, on the surface level, it's sort of this party degeneracy culture of like funny pictures of food or animals, very artsy. A lot of money changes hands, very fast money kind of thing. But the reality is, it's a very harmful thing for people, especially financially. It targets a lot of young people, a lot of impressionable people, and it leads to a lot of issues. Now, that being said, there is this struggle. There's this kind of like fight for the heart of this thing, and I don't think it's going to end anytime soon. Where you do see, some engagements in NFTs by, Starbucks or Disney or other Fortune 500s who are interested in the space, or you see the headline every now and then about some large credit card company establishing infrastructure, or you have the CBC initiative. So I think when people look at this on the surface, they see a very ugly industry. I hate to say it. It's for those that actually go past the initial ugliness and see that there's actually a lot of good people. Not as many as I'd like to. We're certainly a minority in the space, but there's a lot of good people trying to what I call mature the space and bring real assets, real use cases. That's why I am a big fan of regulation. And again, I don't want it at the expense. If people want to run their own projects and run NFTs and do their DeFi protocols, absolutely, because I view them as open internet. I absolutely do. I don't have I don't agree with it, but I also believe in freedom and pursuit of happiness. And if that's something that people want to do, that's fine. But you have to admit that there's been a lot of difficulty with that. That's not to say there isn't in traditional finance, but the claim that blockchain is somehow absolved of this is absolutely wrong, and it will continue. I mean, it's human nature. But that being said, behind that, there is a lot of really good use cases, a really lot of good projects, and always, whenever I guess the question's answered best whenever I talk to someone new about blockchain. I can go through the same set of questions. Bitcoin's a scam. Dogecoin is a joke. What about, name the project NFT that exploded, right? I have to go through all that stuff always. And that creates a big uphill battle for people to get engaged. And then there's people who got engaged that never want to come back, which to me is even greater sin, right? So
Mm.
you have to go through all that to get to what I call like the pearl, like the good stuff. Like, no, actually, we're working on really cool projects with stablecoins. We're working on really great ways of doing decentralized identity and credentials. We're giving people more power over their data. Like all these other stories, which take a while to develop, kind of get drowned out. It's hard to compete with the largest financial scam in the world this year. People really are not going to care about, hey, listen, we launched, some bond on some blockchain. For people in the industry, okay, that's interesting, but for the public by and large, they're going to pay attention more to the salacious stuff. So that doesn't help. It definitely takes away, and it creates this permanent perception. It almost creates a perception that if you're embracing public blockchain and you are from TradFi, there's something wrong with you. Like it was screw loose or something. Like, oh, don't you realize what you're doing or where you're in? Like, and in many ways, I think that has demoralized, or not demoralized, but let me say dissuaded the banks and, excuse me, large institutions from being associated with that sort of stuff, rightly so, right? And it was to give by association to these large public infrastructures. So like, we'll do our own private blockchain. We'll do our own blockchain that's free and clean and doesn't have, any of these like OFAC violations or Tornado Cash, which was, commingling of funds or any sort of like, how do I say, mark, right, like stain on them. Let's do a purely clean blockchain, enterprise only, and we'll show the technology for itself. It is fine, but that to me is only part of the evolution of everything. So it has had a major negative effect. In fact, I think that's where the animosity and the hesitancy in the U.S. regulators have come from, because they're the ones that really look at a lot of the scams that happen. And I mean, like we just had a guy in Turkey that was sentenced to what, 11,000 years in prison for operating an exchange. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you would be crazy to say, oh yeah, this is the future of stuff on the surface of it, right? So I think that has to wash out, and that's only going to wash out if people stick in the industry and stick out a lot of these sort of growing pains, as I call it. And I always use analogies. My final analogy for this is, if you look at the aviation industry, we're in the barnstorming era, right? One day, like people, I'm sure back in the 1910s and 20s were like, oh, we need to fly a plane from New York to London. And, you look at this like little paper biplane, you're like, what the hell is this? There's no way this canvas thing, of what is going to fly. And then 50 years later, we do intercontinental flights, and it's all highly regulated and extremely safe. I think that's part of the transformation here. I think we're seeing the barnstorming ages where people are doing crazy acts, circus acts. It's kind of considered a joke, but eventually, like anything, it will mature, because those people, unfortunately, will move on to something else. I think right now we're actually seeing them move out of the crypto space and move into the AI space, because now there's a lot of AI scams or deepfake scams. I think the same people that like chase the hype, tend to produce those kind of projects, go into, will follow that. We'll be left with the mess, and I think we'll see that mature into something much serious. So what does that mean? Well, a crazy thing I could say is, in 50 years' time, we may have a national blockchain. Every country may have its own sovereign blockchain. There may be a singular or a network of global blockchains, and it may be to the point where using a centralized cloud infrastructure provider is crazy. You could just deploy everything on the blockchain, right? People get paid completely in cryptocurrency or in some sort of virtual assets. CBDCs, commercial deposits, and e-money all coexist. People don't even have paper coin anymore, and those who are concerned about privacy have privacy coins or whatever. Those are like the big crazy stuff where like, wow, that's a world that we can't see past, because right now we're looking at the barnstorming days. That's my hope for this industry, is that it matures out of those things, but it cannot mature until we create the vector for it to mature, when that is regulation.
Some really, really interesting points, and yeah, no, I agree. I'm definitely for regulation, to be honest. I think it's needed. I think that's how you bring more and more people across, because it builds more trust, and people are a lot more likely to use it. So, Dennis, you've obviously shared some brilliant advice today, tons of it, to be honest. I'm going to be watching this back, and I'm going to be able to take tons from it myself as well, and yeah, I'll be able to learn a huge amount. If you could summarize your advice for people who might be looking to follow in your footsteps, what would you say?
If you're looking to follow my footsteps, I would say three things. Always learn, always continuously learn, always challenge yourself to failure, and always ask for help, and you will find it. And I think if you do those three things and you have an attitude of being humble, not taking yourself too seriously, recognizing other people's strengths, recognizing people's diversity and different backgrounds, being tolerant, open-minded, but also very critical-minded, looking at things skeptically, challenging yourself and challenging things. then I think you will do far better than I could. And I think even if you look at my life and my skill, it is not easy. It's not an easy life. Yes, I've been very successful in life, and I'm grateful for that. But the journey still continues. And for me, don't do things because of money. Of course, always think about it, but do things because of something that's passionate. Because money flows, it comes and it goes, whether we like it or not. And you may obsess over that really nice car, that really nice house, or that experience. Eventually, the car gets old. Eventually, the house gets stale. Eventually, you've been there too many times. There's always something deeper that you keep coming back to, and I think that's really your focus. And don't be afraid to reinvent yourself over and over again. Certainly, you don't have to be defined by any one thing. So that's what I would say to people. I would say, and they're not platitudes. They're very, very practical, right? And anyone can sit down and not even write it down, but reflect. I think self-reflection is the biggest thing. Reflect on where they are, and they may get frustrated. I know I do. They may say, "I don't know how to do something." It's all just one step at a time. We have the most knowledge at our fingertips ever. If you don't know how to do something, just Google it. Just start looking, and just go go to the part of your life you've never been. Go somewhere new, and just it's like internal self discovery. I think is really 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 critical. Don't be afraid to work hard. Don't be afraid to fail. You're going to fail. It's a feature, not a bug. And most importantly, be your true self. Don't be a CTO. Don't be, what I am. Be who you are supposed to be. At the end of the day, we're all equal, right? We're all the same. We all have intrinsic value. Just because some of us are, super baller billionaires or millionaire entrepreneurs or athletes or paragons or I would say people who are like, Vitalik, right? Like these absolute geniuses. At the end of the day, everyone, is afraid. Everyone gets hungry. Everyone gets tired. Everyone's in bad mood, good mood. We're all humans. And I think you need to keep that perspective, especially when you're talking to other people and when you're looking at your goals, to keep that in mind that you want the goals that are right for you and are meaningful to you, not necessarily meaningful to society or what anyone else says about you. And that to me is intrinsic happiness. And I hope for today that people walk away from this saying, you know what? This is my truth. I'm going to go pursue that. These are some of the skills. These are things I can do to help get me there. But it's ultimately internally up to me to say, where do I want to be at? And the last thing I would say that's a theme in my life is if you notice, I've achieved many things in my life and then moved on. At one point I was an NASA engineer. I made Eagle Scout. I was an executive director at a bank. I was an architect at a trading firm, right? Like any one of those jobs, people would just stay there and say, hey, this is my life now. Keep going, keep reinventing yourself. Just because you just don't, the last thing I'll say is you just don't have to have one dream in life. You can do multiple stuff. There's no rule that says, dream, oh, you only get one dream, and if you achieve that dream, the rest of your life is done, or the dream you set for yourself is so impossible or so ridiculously specific that if it doesn't come true, your life doesn't have meaning. It's okay to dream, have multiple dreams, get there, and then say, well, now what do I want to do? Don't be defined by things. I think that to me is what keeps things really exciting and really passionate. And there's ups and downs all the way. You have good days, bad days. So that pursuit, I think that pursuit of happiness is most important. I hope that's what people take away from today.
That's great, Dennis. Well, yeah, brilliant words. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to have a conversation with me today. Really enjoyed it. I think I mentioned, I've definitely learned a lot. Hopefully people watching and listening will have a huge amount to take away from this as well. I'm sure they will. If anyone is listening and they want to reach out to you, if they have questions, they're able to drop you a note on LinkedIn or Twitter or anything like this. If they'd like to network with you, for example.
Absolutely. The best way to reach out to me is dropping me either a DM on my Twitter or X, I guess as we call it, at Real Dennis O. You'll see my profile there. So it's at Real Dennis O. Or you can write me a note on LinkedIn. I usually am pretty fair about connecting with people, especially if they have a good intention. I am in the New York City area, so I'd love to meet with you in person or in London or Abu Dhabi. Feel free to reach out. Um, oops, sorry. And
Great.
yeah, don't be a stranger. You'd be surprised. Message me because you'd be surprised. I'm still a very gregarious person. I do a lot of outreach work and charity, and I think I would say that if you are curious, even 10 minutes with me would make my day as well. So do please reach out. I'd love to hear from you.
That's great to hear. Well, Dennis, yeah, have a wonderful day, and I'll speak to you soon.
Jack, what an immense pleasure. Fantastic conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed my time. Apparently, we had such a good time. My cat tried to break in twice, which, by the way, I mentioned for the record, he has never done before. So I guess you could tell we were having a great time. And congratulations to you and all this tremendous work that you've done and continuing to break amazing ground. I know you're going to be incredibly successful with this. And I would always love to be considered for a follow up. If the audience wants it, count me in for a follow up.
Absolutely, we'll definitely make that happen. Absolutely. Well, no, Dennis, thank you very much.